Mr. Chandy, what we see on our screen is a legacy that this man leaves behind. What a wonderful human being. And it's very, very rare that one sees so many crowds, at the funeral of a business leader. Just talks about what a wonderful human being he was, the legacy he leaves behind, and obviously an extremely difficult legacy to really follow.
Absolutely. I would like to share my association with Mr. Ratan Tata. I joined the institution and was the director of the Tata Medical Centre in Kolkata for 12 years, from 2010 to 2022. So you will know that the Tata Memorial Hospital in Mumbai was actually started by the Tatas in memory of Lady Mirbai Tata, who had leukemia. However, it subsequently was handed over to the government and is now run by the Atomic Energy Commission, and it is one of the best cancer hospitals in the country. And by virtue of the fact that the Tata started it, Mr. Tata, the chairman, is always on the board of Tata Memorial Hospital. And Mr. Tata always remarked when he visited Tata Memorial in Mumbai that there were so many patients from Eastern India. And he asked, why is it that they have to come all the way to Mumbai for treatment? And that was the genesis in 2005 of the Tata Medical Centre in Kolkata, which was to be a gift to the Eastern region for providing state-of-the-art cancer care for patients so they didn't have to leave their homes and come all the way down to Mumbai for treatment. And today, I am proud to tell you that it's one of the best cancer hospitals in the Eastern region of India. And my association with the group started in 2009 when Mr. Krishna Kumar called me to ask me whether I would take over as director from Dr. K.T. Dinshaw, who was the former project director. And I said, sir, I will join if it's a charity. He said, yes, Dr. Mammen, we will resource you to provide low-cost, good care for cancer patients. That's when I decided to join. And I had to make a presentation one rainy evening at the site when Mr. Tata visited. And the next day, I was told that Mr. Tata had approved my appointment. One of my earliest recollections of Mr. Tata was at a town hall meeting where doctors were allowed to ask him any questions. And I turned around and asked him, sir, why did you buy Jaguar Land Rover? So he smiled, looked at me and said, we didn't buy it to market Jaguars. We bought it for access to technology. He said, we want the technology in the Jaguar Land Rover to be there in our trucks and our cars. And that was the idea behind the acquisition. Of course, subsequently, it became a major producer of high-end automobiles. Once when he visited the hospital, I took him to the ICU. And I showed him a patient in the ICU who had cancer of the tongue, where 3/4 of his tongue had been removed. So he looked, and then he asked me, can he speak? I said, yes, sir, he can speak. And the gentleman turned around and said, good afternoon, Mr. Tata. Mr. Tata didn't stop there. I thought that would be the end of it. He said, can he taste? I said, sir, he can't taste because we have reconstructed his tongue with a flap, and that flap doesn't have taste buds. That was his attention to detail and wanting to know. So, as you know, Mr. Tata is an architect from Cornell. And from Cornell, whenever he visited the site, he wanted the building to be iconic, to be beautiful, to be state-of-the-art. And in fact, if you come there, you will think you're coming into a research center in Scandinavia and not into a hospital in India.
Yes.
That was the amount of resource he was willing to give to the project saying nothing but the best will do, not saying, oh, it's poor patients, we'll have them on the floor. No, state of the art. In fact, I would go to Krishna and say, I want 10 crores for the lab. He would look at me and say, you need it? Okay, here, sign.
Absolutely. So, Mr.
That
Chandy,
was,
as you're
yeah,
pointing
tell me.
out, of course, his philanthropy is very well known. It's very well talked about. And that's how he went about leaving a legacy behind. Mr. Chandy, do stay with us. Also joining us on the broadcast is Mr. R. Gopalakrishnan. He's the author and former director of Tata Sons. Mr. Gopalakrishnan, good afternoon. Thank you very much for joining us. Mr. Gopalakrishnan, you've had a long personal association with Mr. Ratan Tata. Would you share some of those moments that you spent with him and take our viewers through essentially the great, fantastic human being, the philanthropist who Mr. Tata was?
Well, I don't know. My association has been very long, over 20 years. And I'm in danger of going on and on or repeating what other people have said. But from my perspective, I'll just highlight what leapt out to me about Mr. Tata. The first thing is most managers you meet in the corporate sector are reductionist in nature, which means that if they see something, they will try to find out what is inside this. They are like geologists, they will immediately start digging the ground and trying to find out the constituents, what makes it, and then try to explain whatever they are trying to explain. And Mr. Tata was an astronomer. If you can imagine a geologist and an astronomer landing on the moon, the reports that they send back to Earth will be very different. The geologist will say at 5 feet I found this, at 10 feet I found that. The astronomer will look up and ask the question, what is this a part of? And they are two different questions. They give different answers. And perhaps the fact that Mr. Tata was an architect by training, or maybe his inclination was made that way. He was not a geologist, he was more an astronomer. I mean, we are a combination of both anyway. And that made him highly sensitive to what I call the attributes of perpetual value in a company as distinct from the financial values. The whole world is today obsessed, the world of management, with financial values, valuations, cash flows, multiples. Mr. Tata was respectful of that, and I think he would give a lot of emphasis to it. But he said, apart from being efficient, you must learn to be effective also. And effectiveness doesn't come out of just making profit. Effectiveness comes out of having the community center stage. And I overheard a bit of what my friend Mammen Chandy was telling you, and those are reflective, the stories that he's telling you, of the effectiveness part of the man as compared to the efficiency part of most managers.
Absolutely. And Mr. Mammen Chandy, earlier, you have spoken about the fact that Mr. Ratan Tata did put a lot of emphasis on education, on research, and that is also a field that he worked on. So give us a sense of what that involved.
See, I also want to add, since Gopal is there, that Gopal's wife, Geeta, was the major fundraiser for our hospital. And her innovation and imagination in raising funds for the hospital is something to be seen and believed. So coming back to your question, I still remember a board meeting where I told Mr. Tata, I said, my vision is that Tata Medical Centre should not only be a hospital providing state-of-the-art cancer care, it should teach. Because the only way we can improve care for more of our people is by training doctors to be the best that they can be. And therefore, I wanted to start postgraduate training program. And he approved. And then the question came about research. And some board members felt research was not a priority. And Mr. Tata actually stepped up and said, no, I feel that what is being said is that Tata Medical Centre must have the best research facilities and we must fund it. But I must also tell you of one time when there was a sort of conflict. I wanted, by 2 years after the hospital started, we didn't have enough beds. We were struggling. So he went to the board and said, see, I think it's time for us to start phase two now. And that's another 260 crore expansion. And Mr. Tata said, I don't think it's needed now. So I said, sir, I have to beg to differ, but I think it's needed. And he looked at me and he said, if Chandy wants it, then Chandy can have it. And that was it. Phase two came up as a stunningly new addition, which improved our capacity to 450 beds. So that was the man and his willingness to listen.
Right, absolutely. If I could come to you now, Mr. Gopalakrishnan, Mr. Chandy was talking to us about how he was such a visionary as well. And that is what set him apart from so many business leaders that we see around us today, because here was a man who had the foresight to build the Tata Group into what it is today.
Yes, that is correct. Actually, if I may just overlay, it just so happens that I didn't know that Chandy is also on this particular interview. So I'm just making it a conversation rather than a monologue. Chandy mentioned that my wife Geeta was deeply involved in raising funds for the Tata Cancer Hospital. And she told me one day a story about how sensitive Mr. Tata is. And I said, well, we know he's sensitive. Is that a general statement? And she gave me the following story, that she had gone to see a particular doctor in Bombay about some of her medical issues and was under the impression that the whole clinic was empty. And the doctor sat in the large room and she had a conversation with the doctor explaining her medical problems and her childhood and so on. She was completely unaware that Mr. Tata was the next patient and he's waiting in the next room. And suddenly, after some time, when this conversation was coming to an end, Mr. Tata entered. And of course, she felt very embarrassed because she had been saying all sorts of things. And Mr. Tata came to her and said, please don't worry. The clinic should not have kept the door open. I couldn't help listening to you, but that's it. You can forget that I ever know anything. And every time he met her subsequently somewhere else in the elevator, he would say, I hope you're feeling better, without ever referring to what she had said in the conversation. This is what I mean by sensitivity, that you can empathize and see what the other person feels. And I just thought I would add that little story to what Mr. Chandy was saying, Dr. Chandy was saying a few minutes ago. He was a person who embraced the future. And he had very distinct links. I mean, he was very respectful of the past in terms of the Tata culture. He was very operational in terms of getting today's work done. But he also had his eyes on the future. He used to travel, I think, about 15 to 20 days in a month because he believed it was part of his job to be able to bring the outside world view into the companies which are within Tata Group. So here was a man whose feet were strongly on the ground, whose waist was firm in the present, and whose head was up in the air. And that answers your question about how he became the visionary that everybody calls it. What does that visionary mean? The visionary means a person who's got his feet on the ground, his body under control, and his mind up in the air.
Oh, yes, absolutely. And I was reading one of the pieces that you wrote earlier this morning, Mr. Gopalakrishnan, and one of the points that you, spoke of about was not just his humility, but also, during the time that he took over the Tata Group, he was extremely shy of crowds. And then, now he's, for so many years, of course, he was the tallest man in the room wherever he entered. So, tell us a bit more about that personal transformation, because he was at the end still a very, very private individual.
Oh, I think he was always private and he continued to be private. But, you step up to the plate. Once he became chairman, it was part of his job to be able to make presentation to analysts, talk to shareholders, talk to media, and he changed. But he never changed by moving from being a private and reserved person to being a flamboyant and outgoing person. Perhaps that's not even right to expect a person to change in that way. He changed enough to be able to get today's job done. And that was his great strength.
Right, Mr. Chandy, if you're still with us.
I'm with you.
Yes, thank you very much. Mr. Chandy, you were, of course, talking to us about the institutions that he created. And you know, families remember the human being that there was, but generations after that only remember the institutions that are created by a human being. And that is the legacy that Mr. Tata will leave behind. He'll be remembered through many generations for his philanthropy.
Absolutely. I want to tell you a small little personal anecdote. When I joined the Tata Group, I used to come to work in a half-sleeve white shirt. And Mr. Tata invited me for lunch at the Tata Tea board meeting. My secretary was a very proper person. So she was very worried that I'll go in my half-sleeve shirt to Mr. Tata's lunch. She didn't know how to tell me I should wear a jacket. So she looked at me and said, Mammen, do you know it will be very cold in the Oberoi? So that was her way of telling me I should be suitably dressed for Mr. Tata. That was the respect people had for him. So when you look at institutions that people create, you know, an institution has a spirit, has a character, has something which moves it apart from the day to day. And that is what I wanted to give to Tata Medical Centre, because look at the legacy we are inheriting from Jamsetji. Is there any other company in the world where 60% of the stock is owned by the trust? When you go to Bombay House and see their exposition of the breadth of the Tata Trust's work, from saving turtles to schools to agriculture to village ponds to whatnot, you just are amazed at the breadth of what the Tata Trust do. And that is the vision of the Tatas.
Absolutely. Mr. Chandy as well as Mr. Gopalakrishnan, thank you very much, both of you gentlemen, for taking out the time to be with us on the show.